After landing in Edinburgh, we took a rental car and drove directly west out of Edinburgh. We ended up going to a little village called Loch, located on the western shore of Loch Lomond, where there was a Loch Lomond cruise tour operating nearby. Our first night was spent in the Loch Lomond Arms, a charming little hotel set in an 18th century coaching inn, plus a pub and dining area. After dinner, we took a little walk around the village, including the Loch Parish Church and its cemetery, which had stones that dated back into the 1700s. While out for that stroll, we visited the Loch Pier and surrounding adjacent beaches. The next morning, we headed north, up A82, up into the area which is known as the Highlands of Scotland. Just north of a little town called Tindrum, the landscape started changing drastically to this, and it was breathtaking. Views like this you only really see in movies. The Highlands. Just down this very road, just another couple of miles, some of the landscape from the scenery in the movie James Bond's Skyfall was shot just there down the road in this vicinity. Just a few miles further north, we were passing through an area called the Glencoe Valley. We were going north on A82 towards the little town of Glencoe. I briefly turned to look back to the south towards Glencoe across Lake Leven. The low-hanging clouds added so much to these pictures.
Yeah, thank you.
This is the town of Fort Williams, kind of on the western side of Scotland. Loch Ness and such. This is Fort William, some of the back of the buildings. We probably spent about 2 hours hanging around Fort William, looking at the shopping district and just walking around on the lakefront and the pier. We had a little time to kill, so that's what we did. The Nevis mountain range is right near Fort William, and we were scheduled to go on a gondola experience, but the mountain visitor center was closed due to some mountain biking competitions, so we couldn't do it. About a mile heading north out of Fort Williams, we noticed an old castle. It's called Old Inverlochy Castle. It is a ruined 13th century castle on the banks of the River Loch. And we stopped and took a few minutes to wander around the property and just give it a good looking over. Our second night was spent at the Corriegore Lodge Hotel, which is just north of Fort Williams by about 30 miles. It was a traditional Scottish inn type property, very homey, operated by a couple in their 50s who ran it very well. It was a traditional property with loch views and offering classic rooms and a Scottish restaurant and a beach. We had a gourmet-style dinner and the next morning received a free breakfast. In fact, all the hotels that we went to offered free breakfast, hot and cold. So the following morning, we drove further north up the west bank of Loch Ness to the Loch Ness Scotsman Hotel, where there is a cruise tour that goes out on Loch Ness.
Of the Loch, which is around 230 metres in depth. From here you can get a magnificent view of Edinburgh Castle. He wrote, among the gnomes and ragged things.
We had the option to get off the boat and tour Culloden Castle, but decided not to because it was going to take 90 minutes, which we couldn't afford because we had a very long drive out to Isle of Sky to get there before an evening dinner at the Skeabost Hotel. Going west through Glenmoriston on the way to Skye looked so reminiscent of going through the Glencoe Valley earlier the day before. The bridge at Kyle of Loch was the way to cross over onto the Isle of Skye. We arrived at the Skeabost Hotel somewhere around 5 to 6 o'clock that afternoon and had time to place an order for dinner. Exploring around, I would have to admit that this place was very opulent and it had just beautiful old woodwork all around in all the rooms. After dinner, the concierge suggested we might be able to have time to take a short 15 to 20 minute drive north on A87 to be able to see some standing stones and also perhaps a fairy glen that he spoke about.
Hello from the coral beaches of the Isle of Skye.
Well, we've walked almost a mile and we're supposed to be going to a coral beach, which is kind of this corally sand that really truly looks like a bunch of shells that are crushed. Kind of see the texture. And down below are those beaches that are coral beaches, apparently. So we're going to get down there and see what they are. Probably about a 1.5 mile walk from where we start. Down there are some friends we met from Scotland and London. I won't lie to you. It's a pretty rough one-lane road at the northernmost point of A850 to get to this beach. And the one-lane traffic can sometimes on these rough roads be very harrowing. Dunvegan Castle is the oldest continuously inhabited castle in Scotland, with tours, gardens, and boat trips to the seal colony offshore. Nestled against the backdrop of the Isle of Skye, its ancient walls echo tales of centuries past. The castle's beauty lies not just in its architectural grandeur, but the meticulously preserved artifacts that offer a glimpse into the lives of its inhabitants. The surrounding gardens with the tranquil Loch nearby offer striking landscapes and add to the charm. A visit to Dunvegan Castle takes you back to a bygone era where legends intertwine with reality. Personally, I like history and I like antiques, and this was a very elaborate combination of both. Most ancient castles have a dark side too, including the dungeon and also the hidden parts such as the servants' quarters and the passageways that invited and honored guests didn't normally see. The servants' quarters. The castle was first built in the 13th century and developed piecemeal over the centuries, as this old but modern-style plumbing illustrates, as well as this antiquated fire extinguisher that we noticed on the way out. We heard that we should try to drive out to Niest Point, where a lighthouse sits atop a precipice surrounded by unbelievable vistas and landscapes. So, leaving Dunvegan Castle, that's exactly what we attempted to do. Again, mostly one-lane roads with limited turnouts and increasingly more frequent traffic the closer we got to the point. With only 18 miles to go, and well over an hour later, we finally arrived at the point. All kidding aside, the views were well worth the drive, and I can see why there was so much traffic along that narrow, remote, and seemingly isolated, almost inaccessible coast of Scotland. The panorama of this beautiful country is nothing short of magical. I can't really explain it, but I felt so connected to this landscape in some way. I know that somewhere far back in history my ancestors came from an area like this. I took one reflective moment to look back at the bridge leaving Isle of Skye. A fast-paced 3-hour drive north up A890 took us to Inverness, and on the city's east side, near 5 o'clock, we arrived at the Culloden House, where we would spend that night. Here we are arriving at our residence at the Culloden House. At the time of the Jacobite uprising in 1745 through 46, Bonnie Prince Charlie used the Culloden House as his lodging and battle headquarters prior to the fateful battle on Culloden Moor. Today, this historic Inverness luxury hotel stands on nearly 40 acres, where you can wander about the property and enjoy the exceptional peace and tranquility and majesty of the grounds. I've always liked exploring old places, so I couldn't help myself but walk around all the different rooms that I could film and look how things were laid out. Looks like they have wardrobes instead of closets, which is custom for Scotland and Ireland, I believe. England probably too. And then we go out here onto the grounds. Looks like it's big enough almost to play polo on. There's our friends that we've met at another town. Well, it's out here raining, but it's not raining that hard, and Mary Martha didn't want to go for the walk because of the rain. But I just thought it would be a nice walk after we had dinner. And so that's what I'm doing, walking on these grounds of this nice hotel that we're staying at, the Culloden House. It's very near the Culloden Battlefield, where the Jacobites and the clans got together and fought against the British regiment, ended up losing, and that's when the clans all began to have their downfall. And I guess then it all began to come under British rule up here in Scotland. But anyway, it's a pretty pleasant walk. You can see that in the background. It's really neat, the estate, walking under these trees back here. And that's the entrance behind me, right there. And anyway, there's some pretty cool things. These trees over here, walking through this grove of trees. Probably not going to have time to do this tomorrow, so I just thought, well, you know, why not go out here for a walk? It's not raining that hard. No thunderstorm or anything like that. Anyway, tennis courts are way over there. I don't know if you see them or not. Anyway, that's all for now. I actually hit a little croquet out in the front lawn right after dinner. The next morning, we were up and headed nearby to the Culloden Battlefield, the site of the last pitched battle on British soil. Culloden is a somber reminder of Scotland's turbulent past and offers a deeply moving experience. The grave markers and the memorial cairn stand as solemn tributes to those who fell here. This is the fields of the Battle of Culloden, where a lot of the Fraser clan is popularized in the TV series Outlander. The visitor center is outstanding, blending historical artifacts, interactive displays, and immersive multimedia presentations to bring the events of April 16, 1746 vividly to life. The center's staff were knowledgeable and passionate, and ready to share stories and answer questions. Clava Cairns, a well-preserved Bronze Age burial site, was less than a mile away from the battlefield, and probably less than a 5-minute drive. Very peaceful area, and much, much older and more ancient. Leaving the peaceful, solemn serenity of this ancient, hallowed place, we headed down A9 past Inverness towards Edinburgh, where we would stay at the Scotsman Hotel in the downtown area near the Royal Mile. Directly next to the Waverley train station, the hotel is named for the groundbreaking national newspaper who took up residence in these beautiful Baroque buildings. We had dinner that night in the Grand Cafe inside the Scotsman. The next morning, our main goal was to walk around the city a little bit. This is a view from up top of Carlton Hill, overlooking a lot of Edinburgh. So we wandered down to Princess Street, which we walked along until we could see the castle up on the hill, at which point we climbed the pretty steep hill up to the castle. The castle is quite large, has very many sections, so I'm just basically going to let the pictures talk for themselves over the next minute or so. Apparently, Mons Meg is a gun that's so powerful and big enough that it can fire one of those stone balls that you see laying there about 2 miles all the way out into the harbor. Immediately leaving the castle, we filed right on to the Royal Mile, which was quite busy due to the festival activity there. In addition to checking out the businesses along the mile, the streets were abuzz with activity due to the festivals. Please take a moment to enjoy the street performer named Mr. Banana for the next 45 seconds or so. The next day, a hired driver took us down towards Hadrian's Wall, and on the way we stopped off at Melrose Abbey. A lady actor on the grounds engaged us in a conversation about knighthood and medieval warfare.
I've got a wild boar. I've seen some goats. Sheep are everywhere. I've never seen so many sheep in my life.
Absolutely. Then the only other bit we have is our tools down here. So these would have been used by the barber surgeon or the physician who would have been in attendance at a joust to attend any injuries there might be. And as you can see, they're rather gruesome.
Around you just for a second. That's all good. Very good. Roman occupation in Scotland chronologically, I thought, was best summarized by this chart in the museum on the Abbey grounds. On departure from the Abbey, we passed through the village of Melrose on our way down to the English border and then further south to Hadrian's Wall. This is the border of Scotland and England. We stopped here a few minutes to stretch our legs and then headed 70 miles further down towards Hadrian's Wall, which we found out was built by the Emperor Hadrian between 122 and 128 AD. This Roman fort was one of many that were built ever so often along the length of the wall to maintain troop support. This would be a view that the Romans about 1900 years ago would be looking north, hoping not to see some of the scavengers and the barbarians of the Scotlands called the Picts or other type of barbarians. This is why they built Hadrian's Wall and that I'm standing inside of a fortress here. The next morning we boarded a twin-prop plane for a 1-hour flight from Edinburgh to Belfast. After checking into our hotel at the Europa, we took a little hike and walked around Belfast to orient ourselves around the hotel, to exchange money. We had a late lunch at a really neat place called Tim Hortons for burgers. And after the Titanic exhibit, then we scouted out the Crown across the street, which is a really neat pub where we ended up having our dinner that night. It really must have been a popular place because it was jam-packed when we walked in, and that was probably around 5:30 or so. However, looking back a couple of hours before we had dinner at the pub, we visited the Titanic Exhibit Museum. We learned that the Titanic was constructed in Belfast, but we learned an awful lot of things, and this museum was packed with extraneous information chronicling construction of the Titanic until after the sinking, and then the actual years later relocating and recovering many artifacts. The next morning, we picked up our rental car and left Belfast, heading north up to the area on the north coast, Carrick or Rede swinging bridge. Enjoy the zen. From the parking lot, it's about a 3/4 mile hike down to the bridge. I mean, for the person who's scared of heights, it might be a little daunting, but I didn't have a bit of problem with it, especially after hiking Angel's Landing in Zion National Park in Utah. Driving west on A2 along the coastline, we just happened upon this little white park bay and just felt like we had to get out and hike down to the beach. At least it felt like it was just calling me to come down there and walk in the sand.
Well, here we are on the northern coast of Ireland, up near the Carrick and Rede Ridge, and also Giant's Causeway, just down the way there, over that precipice.
4 miles further to the west on Causeway Road, we arrived at Giant's Causeway, the main attraction of our day drive on the way to Sligo. It was the one place I didn't want to miss if I took a trip to Ireland. This site is best characterized as vertical polygonal columns of basalt, which form from cooling of magma after volcanic activity. Legend has it that the Irish giant named Finn McCool created a causeway to get across the Irish Sea to face his rival, the Scottish giant Benan Donner. And then, following their fearsome meeting, Benan Donner ripped up the causeway as he fled back to Scotland, leaving what you see here today. Any way you slice it, Giant's Causeway is a very special place, and you will feel blessed for having been able to see it and stand on the stones. The half-mile hike back up the hill to the visitor center leads to the restaurant called The Nook, where we ate a bite before continuing on to Sligo. About 19 miles south of Sligo, we rolled into the Coopershill House property about 7:30. About a mile back on a one-lane country road, a quite remote estate from the 1700s.
This is Coopershill House, just 15 or 20 miles south of Sligo, Ireland, Republic of Ireland. Very, very far back into the woods.
8 generations in the making, the owner and proprietor and his wife, Simon O'Hara, run this property on a seasonal basis. The original estate and house of over 22,000 acres was granted to his 8th generation ancestor by the British government in repayment of that ancestor's service in the military. Most of the furniture has accumulated over a period of 250 years by all the ancestors before his time. They hire a well-trained, excellent staff that work different shifts, both morning and evening.
I once had a dream. It was an early Irish morn. Couldn't quite make it out. But then, there it was.
Upon my request, Simon was delighted to be able to show us some of the places guests don't normally see, such as down in the basement. One area was the designated laundry room with the actual near 200-year-old washing machine and the door, lock, and skeleton key, original to the house, circa 1750 to 1774. Everywhere you could look, there was just old-world charm in all directions. As we left Coopershill House on the tree-lined, one-lane private drive, we said goodbye to the deer farm on the left on the property. Upon leaving Coopershill that morning, not more than 20-minute drive to the west, stands an archaeological site that we were challenged to hike up to the top of it, even going above and into the clouds. It appeared that other hikers had built their own cairns, so I built mine, and at the top there's 2 little rocks, which is one for me, one for Mary Martha. Looking down from Knocknaera, the low-hanging clouds were prevalent all over both Ireland and Scotland. From Carrowmore Megalithic Cemetery, about 2 miles, you can see Maeve Cairn atop Knocknaera, which we climbed earlier. Carrowmore is the oldest and the densest concentrations of Neolithic tombs in Ireland, dating about 6,000 years ago. Most of these have been patiently lying in farmers' fields for centuries. Later that afternoon, our destination was the 12, the hotel we were going to stay at for the night, west of Galway. The 12 had several restaurants on their lower level, but we ate across the street at Donnelly's for supper, and then took a stroll for about a block down to the beach and the pier of Barna. And before it got dark, we took a little drive to the west.
We're a little west of Galway, and we're looking south into one of the inlets there. And they have a nice little beach going on here. But we get a little video about it.
The next day, our goal was to make a loop down into the southwest direction through the Burrens, and then work our way through that, and then eventually we would come out further to the west and south to the cliffs of Moher. Burren means a rocky place. However, due to a traffic stoppage, possibly due to an accident at Ballyvaughan, we had to take a detour along the actual coastline, and this was the best thing we could have done as far as the scenery. The Burrens area seems to have very little topsoil, and basically there's just a rock foundation underneath the entire landscape, and that includes what we're looking at here. The rock basically is exposed all across the shoreline. There's a huge parking lot at Cliffs of Moher, and then you basically walk about a quarter mile over to the cliffs. There's hiking trails that extend probably about 5 miles north and south if you really wanted to walk them, but we did not have the time to do it. It gets really windy the closer you get up near the cliffs, for sure. Leaving the cliffs of Moher down N85 through Ennis, we pass by Limerick and then join N21 down towards Killarney through a beautiful little township called Adair. Passing by St. Mary's Cathedral in Killarney, we were not but a few minutes away from our lodging for the night. As at Coopershill before, a long tree-lined canopy-covered driveway is usually a good sign. And there it was, Cahernane House, awaited us at the end of the driveway, on a private estate about 1 mile south of the Killarney town center. Constructed in 1877, this imposing manor house was formerly home to the Henry Herbert family. This charming manor house boasts original features and old-world charm in all its rooms, from antiques relevant to the original period and wooden ceiling beams. Each room in the manor house is unique. Having walked through most of the rooms that I could as I explored the premises, it appeared to be about 50 guest rooms in total. Down the staircase from the lobby was the basement cafe where we were to have dinner that evening. Down a 4th floor remote hallway hangs the Duck, an artifact attributed to be painted by Catherine Herbert on the original wall of her children's nursery. The next morning's agenda was to travel around the Ring of Kerry by car. This is the north shore of the isthmus that the Ring of Kerry encircles, looking out into the Atlantic Ocean. But the slope on these hills is just out of this world. Route N70 pretty much forms a roadway that makes a ring around the isthmus of the Ring of Kerry. So that's what we traveled on. Fort McGee is where the Skellig Experience Visitor Center is located, way out there on the Ring of Kerry. They can offer the video as well as cruise tours out to the Skellig Islands, home to a 6th century monastic settlement.
This is Waterville, also out on the Ring of Kerry, out at the end of the peninsula.
It's a very fishy smell out here, got a very bad stink. This viewpoint marked about the 3/4 mark of encircling the Ring of Kerry right here. And a couple of hours later we arrived at Hayfield Manor, which is in the city of Cork, near the University College of Cork. This is where we would spend that evening. It is a family-owned boutique luxury hotel, and rightly so, apparently listed as one of the best hotels in Ireland. A 5-star perfect blend between historic opulence and modern amenities. From the indoor formal charms to the outside perfectly manicured grounds within walled private solitude, a great place to walk the property, take some deep breaths and smile and get away from the world's worries. They even offered turn-down service and supplied a golf putter and a golf returning machine in our room.
Hey, crikey.
Another good night's sleep, and it was off to Blarney Castle, just down the road. I didn't even know that there were caves that ran under the castle, but they sure were. There was a line ascending up into the castle, climbed a spiral stairway that got ever so squeezy, which exited onto a platform where you can see the countryside there, and then reformed into another line where you could kiss the Blarney Stone, just like my wife there. Now, I'm no germaphobe, but how many millions of people have put their saliva on that stone? And then a random person comes up and takes a picture of us and says, "Kiss your wife." What the? And no, I didn't kiss the stone myself. At least not directly. I didn't. And after that comment, perhaps I needed a time out. And my wife took a time out too. I'll try to get rid of the levity with a little serious music here to change the mood. On the way out, I just felt like taking some videos and pictures of some of the pastoral sounds and sights of the grounds. From here, it was going to take about 2.5 hours to get to Dublin and the Davenport Hotel, where we were going to stay the next 2 nights. The concierge there told us if we walked about 15 minutes, we could get to a place she enjoyed called Searson's Pub, which is where we had our dinner that evening. It must have been a real popular place because it was full and it was humming. We took a relaxing stroll back. What looked like a hospital for the insane was the Royal Hospital of Dublin. The next morning started with a Dublin walking tour with guide James O'Day. Swinney's Pharmacy was right across the street from the Davenport, and I really wanted to see it.
So, very much like the old pharmacy. Hasn't changed really since.
Oh no.
You got the old
Swinney was in charge, has it?
Yeah, well, part of my family. This is a song about a shoe, I imagine.
How?
F.W. Swinney and Company opened its doors as a dispensing chemist in 1853. World-renowned author Oscar Wilde was born just 100 yards away. Swinney's Pharmacy is featured as a backdrop in James Joyce's Ulysses. Swinney's has the great honor of being described in sumptuous detail within the novel, and that description stands to this very day. Mr. O'Day showed us what a typical Georgian-style house looked like. He took us by the dental hospital and dental school in Dublin. And I would randomly stop and take videos or photos of various different kinds of buildings and architecture that I thought were worth recording. And the barber shop that's been established here for quite some time. One pub was decorated with the Irish historic call to revolt against the British. A bronze Molly Malone selling cockles and mussels. A building for the Sick and Indigent Roomkeepers Society. A walk past the cricket field at Trinity College.
Oh yeah. What is not shown there is black marble. Kilkenny is known as the Marble City. It's a black marble, but it's not marble. It's actually a hard...
He was pointing out to us how well that the stonemasons had carved out many of the stone carvings on the building, including the cats and the squirrels. All of this on the campus of Trinity College. Protected in the old library area is an exhibit containing the Book of Kells, which is really 4 books, one of each gospel in Latin, artistically copied by hand, artistically illustrated using fonts they created around 800 AD. These displays show enlarged examples of artwork from the books. Nearby is the long room of the library, which contains over 200,000 of the library's oldest books. It is nearly 65 meters in length. Displayed here is the oldest surviving Irish harp, probably from the later Middle Ages. Here we walked past some surviving portions of the old Dublin Castle. And this grassy field used to be an old dirty pool, which is Dublin's namesake. We even had about an hour-long tour of St. Patrick's Cathedral, which happens to be the largest church in Ireland. It dates back into the 1200s. It's not even a Catholic church, it's Anglican, or the Church of Ireland. This section was reserved for those of the highest honors. And here you can see the original mosaic tile floor from the 1200s. After Mr. O'Day had finished his walking tour with us, we started heading back towards our hotel, stopping at Mary's Hardware and Wow Burgers, where we had our hamburger dinner. Wow Burgers was in the basement of the hardware store, and it had some neat old signs down there. And then after Mary's, we started back towards the hotel and just luckily came across the National Museum of Ireland, specializing in archaeology. So we only had 30 minutes to tour it. It would have probably taken an hour and a half if we'd have had more time. The museum carried a vast inventory of all kinds of ancient artifacts going back into the Paleolithic period all the way up until a few hundred years ago. And it really had a large section of artifacts that were made out of gold, and I was surprised at the number of gold artifacts that they had in there. The museum was so large that there were entire rooms I didn't even know were there. But we had to leave when closing time came. Of course, the next morning we got up, we went to the airport, and we flew out of Dublin all the way back to Atlanta. So glad to be back in the USA after being out of the country for 2 weeks. But we left behind memories of several people that we would like to never forget.